Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Beckham. The subject here is bracketed exposures in Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop. And along with that, we're also going to be taking a look at auto align in Photoshop. There are times when the range of contrast in the scene we're shooting begins to get just a little too much for the sensor to cope with. Either that, or we want to ensure that to get the maximum wow value from the image, we try to lessen the need to push those raw sliders a little too far. What we're doing is getting the exposure closer to what we need, but if we cannot achieve that in one image, then we shoot 2 or 3. Some photographers who may not be using Photoshop, smart objects, layers and layer masks will often turn to using graduated filters on their lens. But what I'm about to demonstrate, in my view, is better than that. It's cheaper, quicker, and it's much less of a nuisance than having to apply filters when we're out and about with our camera. In addition, and as we get more experienced in Adobe Camera Raw, we will inevitably use the strategic tools more often, such as the spot removal, adjustment brushes, graduated filters, and radial filters. Now, I've noticed that even a good computer can struggle to do all of this work for us, especially when we're using all of the tools I've just mentioned, and some of them more than once. What we're going to do here helps us to step around that problem too. So if we look at the bottom 3 images here, this one here has great exposure on the foreground, but we've got burnout in the sky. This one has a great sky, but we have a lot of dark tones in the foreground. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we couldn't pick this image or this image and make a good seascape of it. But what I'm going to do here is to use these two. I'm going to use the good foreground and the good sky. So selecting them both, I need to open them both up into Adobe Camera Raw. Once the images are opened up into Camera Raw, I'm going to hold my Control key and select the second of the two, so both of them are selected. And I want to do most of the global editing. So that's going to consist of lens corrections, which I'll do first. We can do a little bit of color as well. I'm going to probably adjust it individually in a little while, but if you ever want to change the image you're viewing, if you select this one first and then hold the Control key, now we've still got both thumbnails selected, but now we're looking at the lighter of the two. And the reason I wanted to do that was to go to my white balance and maybe to click around here, because this was an evening shot, a lot of sand, and I think that little bit of warmth is going to help. One thing that's quite important to do while I've got both of these selected is the spotting via the spot removal tool, because if we look at the settings for the image that I've shot here, we've got an f-stop of f10, so you can see quite a few little spots in the sky there. I'll quickly zoom into them, but I think you've probably already seen the video where we put these right pretty quickly, and we can touch the V key and lose that little overlay if we want to do this without that getting in our eye line, and it's just a case of clicking each one, making sure we do them all, because at least we're getting 2 layers done at the same time. Now, as you can see here, I've reselected the darker of the two, and I've turned on the visualize spots from the bottom there, and as you can see with this particular image, that's working pretty well, showing me spots that I missed with the naked eye, so to speak. Now, as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I believe I've done all of the spots that I want to do, but I will have another look a little bit later on. Both of these images are going to be adjusted slightly independently. That's the whole purpose of the exercise. But I will do one or two changes here. I almost always give a healthy amount of clarity, and we're going to need a shot of colour. But I think I'll leave it at that for the moment. So I'm going to open both of these up into Photoshop as smart objects. Now once I have both images opened up on screen, I'm going to use my Move tool to drag out the tab, and I can drag this image onto this one to create a layered stack. Now because we need these images to line up, if we hold the Shift key when we do that, the image will drop 4 square on top of the other one, and we won't have to shuffle it into place. And I can shut this one down because now we have both of our layers sitting on the right hand side, and this will be a good point to start saving this as a project. Now I'm not sure if I said in the introduction that I shot these images from a tripod. So that means that both of them will line up, but we can check that by just zooming in a little bit and turning the top one on and off. If there's any movement, we will soon see it, and I'll show it to you in a little while with a different image that I've got to show in a few moments. So Control 0. Something I've noticed that I should have addressed in Camera Raw was the leveling of the horizon, but now we've made a start, I'll do that a little later. So what we have on the right hand side are two smart objects, both of which can be edited independently of each other. So what I'm going to do to make a start is to get a feel for the image, is to select the top layer and apply a layer mask. I'm going to put a gradient on there to bring the sky through from the image beneath. So I need black as my foreground, I need my gradient tool, I need the linear option, and I need foreground to transparent. And what I'm going to do here is just hold the Shift, click and drag. There we have the sky and the foreground, and already we're seeing an improvement. But now we can see both parts together. We can start to do some fine tuning of each of those parts, and this is what gives you so much freedom here. I'm going to start with the sky. Let's select that, double click, and take this image back into Camera Raw. Now I'd like to give the sky a bit of power. Maybe we could even squeeze a bit more colour. We can possibly look at plenty of clarity, maybe even a little touch of dehaze if we like it. The one thing about a dehaze, it does a great job, but sometimes it upsets the blues in my image. But here it's not doing too bad. But I may look at these two shades of blue here by going to my hue, saturation and luminance, selecting the hue, and just bring in the blues a little bit more this way. Usually 8 to 10 does it, and that looks pretty good to me. I'll go back to the basic tab. What I may like to do here is take a look at the sky quite enlarged. So I'm going to right click and look at this at 200%. Now we can see a little bit of noise in the sky, not a great deal of course, because this was shot with 100 ISO. But on the sky layer, or the layer I'm going to use for the sky, I'm going to go to my detail option, and I'm just going to lose a little bit of that noise. Look at the difference that makes, just a little bit over 20, and it smoothed out that sky lovely. You won't see that noise in the foreground. It's only in the smooth tones of the sky that sometimes we can see it. So remember, small steps here, Control 0 to fit the image back on screen. Now back to my basic tab once again. I'm looking at the histogram. We seem to have a fair spread, but we've got to bear in mind that we're working with two separate layers here. So I've always said that we use the histogram as a guide, but probably it's more of a guide here than in normal circumstances when we're only working on one image. So we can investigate a little blacks even, maybe even a little whites, and I think I'm more or less happy with that. But we've got some streaks of the sun coming down here. Maybe I could just lighten those to draw us down to that area, And as you know, we can do that with the adjustment brush. If I select the brush, I think I need to zoom in quite a bit, something like that. I'll drop the brush size down. I'll just sweep along there once to create the pin. Look over on the right hand side. I'll double click the highlights, double click the exposure, and then I can think about what I want to do. But to be honest, it probably was going to be, well, I'm not sure they're highlights, probably mid-tone. So I'm going to go to the exposure alone and just sweep my brush down there, and a little bit there, and a little bit there. Small steps as always here, just moving across to the right. Does that need a little more light? Well, who knows. Remember, we're working on a smart object here, so we can always come back and adjust it. I would like to have the top of the sky darker. I'm going to show you a different way to do that rather than a gradient. And I've had more thoughts about the sky and the blue, so I'm going to hit the H key to go back to the main group of tabs, then back to the hue, saturation and luminance, and I'm just going to push that blue up a little bit, and I'm going to click OK to open that up into Photoshop. Always an exciting time when we see the sky mix with the land, but now we can see the land is a little bit too pale. Maybe we need to give just a bit more emphasis there. But as we know, that's pretty easy to do. Let's double click the smart object. I don't think I need any dehaze in here. I certainly don't want to raise the shadows, although if I did, would it lighten up these areas which are bushes? Because sometimes we can still lighten the shadows, but at the same time take the exposure down, maybe a little more warmth from the sand, maybe a little less exposure, but sometimes we actually don't know if we've got this right until we click OK and look at it in conjunction with the sky, and now we've got a bit better balance, but I think I need to go down a little more just to get it right, just a little bit more down there. And if you did want to lighten these up, then you could use an adjustment brush, of course. And I think that looks much better. Now I want to darken down the top part of the sky, and here's a way I often do that. Making sure that I've got the work that I've done so far saved, so I've got both layers as smart objects with the layer mask. I'm going to make a copy of my sky layer. Right click and new smart object via copy. Then I'm going to select both of the layers above, the two we've been working on up to now, right click, and I'm going to commit them. I'm going to say just merge those two layers. Then I would save my work as Anabay 2. So now I can come back into my layers and the smart object that I still have at my disposal, double click to open it up. Rather than putting a graduated filter on here, I've often noticed that I get a slightly better result when I drop the exposure. I'm going to do it quite severe here, and you'll see how that blends in a moment. I'll open that up, and as soon as it's on screen, I'll apply a mask to the two layers we put into one a few moments ago. And now I can just use the same tool, black as my foreground, gradient, same options from the top, just to put a bit more density in the top of the sky. And if I really felt it needed it, I could use a little bit of that at the bottom, but I don't like that. That's a little bit too much. So if I was going to do it at the bottom, I would use a brush, sorry, I'm hitting the wrong key there. Hit the square bracket keys to the right of the letter P. I'll drop the size of the image down just a little bit. And if you look up at the flow, it's set to 5%, so I can just do a little bit of darkening along the edge there, but the tool doesn't run away with me or over darken it as it did a few seconds ago. So I think we're beginning to get somewhere here. I think what I'll do at this point is to flatten those together. I'll say that I'm happy with the work I've done, or we could merge visible. It doesn't matter because we've got to straighten up the horizon now, so we can just zoom in a little bit just so we can see it clearly. Pick up your crop tool, pick up your straighten tool, make sure you've got no crop values there. Tell Photoshop which part needs to be straight, Control 0, and we can take a look. You can see that it brings the image in quite a bit on the edge. I'm going to take it back out because remember content aware? Well, we know that's pretty good. I think I'll bring that down just a little bit. Not too much, but just a touch. I'm happy with that. I'm going to hit the tick on the options bar, and what I'm going to do is fill in these edges with content aware. Let's do that very quickly with the polygonal lasso. I doubt very much that I'm going to have a problem with this, but of course I could have easily cropped it off. Going to use the shortcut keys here. Shift and F5 will bring up the content aware fill. Content aware is still there from last time, so the enter key is all we need, and Control D, and it looks pretty good to me. Let me do the other side. I've got a little tiny bit down the bottom as well that I missed there, so I'll go around and do that. Once again, Shift F5 and enter. A few seconds for Photoshop to do its work. Control D. Of course you would zoom in and take a better look than I am, but I'm pretty confident it's just about right. Now we've got two people on the beach there, which I think gives this whole area a nice bit of scale, but a great log sitting there which is attracting my attention, and people further along the beach which are so small they almost look like a mistake. So I'm just going to zoom in to that area. We could use a separate layer for this, but this work is so easy that I'm not going to do that. Spot healing brush, just drop the brush down, just wipe it across that person there, and across that person, and the log on the beach needs another touch. That's okay. Control 0. There's my completed image. But what I may do, a little tip which I may have shown you already, but in case I haven't, I often go to my image menu, image size, and I add a bit of width on the image but not the height. So normally this would come up linked together. So click the link. I'm going to add about 400 pixels. So what's that? 61, 62. Let's go for 66100. So I'm changing the width and not the height. Click OK, and we get just a little bit more of a panoramic look to the image. Now I'd be saving this as a finished image. I've just put a very thin stroked line around the outer edge of this so that I can hit the F key once, twice, and Control 0, so we can just sit back and take a look at the image we've created with two smart objects where we've used the sky from one and the foreground from another. Now I'd like to run this technique again with the three images you can see with the green labels, but I'll speed the process up because a large part of it is the same as we've just demonstrated. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that the image I've got highlighted on the right has a nicely exposed foreground, but if you look up at the left here you can see that in fact it's had one more stop in the exposure than the camera was willing to give. This image here, which I'm going to use as the other one, has 2 stops less exposure, but it has a beautiful sky. I could possibly use this sky, and if I got into any difficulties with the two being too far apart, which I don't think we will, I could always switch. But for now I'm going to select both of these and open them up into Camera Raw and select them both just as before. But I also want to check to make sure that we've got these two images nicely lined up, because I know I shot these by hand, so if they line up it would be a miracle. Now with both of the images in Camera Raw, I've zoomed in on the trees because I've got the foreground layer selected here, but if I go to the other one and you look at the tree, even giving a few seconds for the image to sharpen up, we can see we've got quite a bit of movement here. But no problem, we're going to deal with that. So I'm going to select both of these. I'll hit Control 0, and I'm going to do exactly the same as I did before with the seascape. So there's the two layers made, and the layer mask has been applied just as before. Now when we look into the middle distance at the trees, I think even at this size we can clearly see we have a problem here, but I will zoom in just a little more. Now it's no point us going ahead and doing a lot of editing here, only to find later on that these two images are not going to align that well. And the reason I say that is we cannot align smart objects. So here's a tip to test the water just to see if it's worth us proceeding any further than this. I have to say that probably 9 times out of 10 what I'm going to do works perfectly. On the odd occasion it doesn't, and you win some, you lose some. I'm going to select both of these layers and I'm going to drag them down over the copy icon. So I've got my smart objects up my sleeve, but these two I've highlighted. I'm going to right click and rasterize them. Now, while they're still both highlighted, I can go to my edit menu and I can choose Auto Align Layers, and I'd like you to look at the tops of those trees when I use the automatic setting here and click OK. Pretty magical, isn't it? When I hit Control 0, OK, we'd have to do a little bit of cropping, but we now know it's OK to proceed with our smart objects. So what I could do here is go to my history, and I could go back to just when I got to the gradient there. So I've just stepped back because the next thing I want to do is any fine tuning of those two layers. We've gone back to a blurred middle distance, of course, but we'll fix that again a little later. So I'm going to go back and do what I did with my sky previously. Make some adjustments, push up the color, contrast wherever I want it, maybe deal with a bit of noise, and then open it back up into Photoshop. So with a few changes to the sky, I don't think the foreground needs any. I quite like it just as it is, and the middle distance looks okay too. So I've saved this as Landscape 1 PST, which means I've got both raw smart objects and my mask, but it also means I can now rasterize these two layers by selecting both of them, right click and rasterize. I can leave them selected and go and reapply our auto align layers. In the auto setting, click OK. See the tree snap into position. You can zoom in and have a look around, make sure it's done a good job, but you've only got to look at the background on the horizon to see that it looks pretty good. I'll need to do just a little bit of cropping here, so let's pick up the crop tool. No values at the top of the screen. I'll click to see that. I think I can bring the bottom up a tiny amount. This time I will just crop a bit just to make sure we lose all of those little faults around the edge. We're only losing a few pixels here, no great problem with that, and hit the enter key. Now at this stage I think I'm quite happy to merge these together or even flatten them, either way, and then just take a time out to decide what to do next. Well, I pushed the highlights in the sky quite heavily when I took the sky back into Camera Raw, and although it's a very small area, I've got tiny little bit of burnout here. So I'm going to pick up my freehand lasso tool. I'm going to make a pretty rough selection around there. I'm holding the shift key to add one to another, although I do have the icon checked at the top of the screen, but the shift key will add one selection to another. Shift F5, content aware, Control D, Control 0. I think we've got that sorted. The only other part is this little area of lightness here. Do I want to try to cover that up? Well, let's try a patch. I've got the lasso tool selected, so I'm going to draw a selection around here, select and mask to feather the edge of that. If I make it really soft, it may just drop in without any work at all. Click OK to that, then Ctrl J to copy that to a new layer, move it into position. It's a little bit dark, as you can see, so Ctrl L to bring up my levels, put the cursor in the mid-tone. If I put tap the up arrow, you can see I'm just blending that in nicely, and if I didn't feel it was done adequately, I could just use a layer mask there too. But I think that's going to work pretty well, certainly better than it was. Looking around the image, I'm going to flatten these two layers together. Pick up my burn tool from the toolbox, make a nice big brush. I've got shadows which I'm going to select, and the exposure probably about 5% to start with. 0.5 should do that. A little bit of burning of the sky at the top left, not too much. A little bit up the top there and around, just taking down those shadows, making a bit more of the sky. Switch to the dodge tool and maybe I'll go to mid-tones, I think. Just going to, that was a bit heavy, Ctrl Z. Looking up, you can see straight away, if you take your eye off the ball for 2 seconds, you can see the exposure that was last set here was much too high. So once again, down to 5%, and all I wanted to do was just brush across that distance there, just lift them tones just a tiny amount to finish our manipulation. Although there's one thing I've not done, which I've demonstrated a couple of times, a little bit of vignetting around the edge. I've added my selection, inversed it, feathered it 450 pixels. I'm hiding it, bringing up my levels with Ctrl L. Just a little tweak of the mid-tone just to take it down at the edges, a tiny amount. Ctrl D to finish, and we can take a look at it with that F key. So as we take a look at the final image, this technique allows you to work in a slightly different way when you're actually shooting your photographs. Bracketed exposures are very quick and easy to do. Our cameras can set up to do it automatically, so as we press the button we get the 3 shots, 1, 2, 3. And this technique also allows me to take and present images in lighting conditions where getting the shot right with just one picture would be difficult and sometimes impossible. But even if it's possible, what I've done here is limited the amount of movement I have to put onto those sliders, and when we're trying to put plenty of impact, color, clarity, contrast into the images, that's a very good thing.